Hey guys, Captain Marvel comes out this Friday in theaters. And in celebration of that, we built an application based on the Marvel API. So let's check out how we built it. Unless you've been living under a rock, you know that Captain Marvel will be in theaters this Friday. Actually, if you're a true fan, what you did is you bought tickets 2 months ago and you're seeing it at 7 p.m. on Thursday night in your local IMAX. What we did in response to that is we built an application that allows you to search for Marvel characters utilizing the Marvel API. So the first thing I want to do is show you the application that we built. Let's check it out. This is Hero Search, and you can find this website on herosearch.coderfoundry.com. And I'd like to show you kind of what we did and how we built it. And so let's just look in real quickly like what's happening here. So you can see at the top, I've got this really custom kind of header at the top. This is basically an image that repeats itself. And then I've got this really kind of cool gradient background. And all that's done in CSS. And then I've got this Hero Search at the top, which is really a font, and I've got a style on it. And in here, I've got a simple Bootstrap website. And this is just some things that we styled up for the Captain Marvel movie. And these are some Bootstrap cards and a kind of banner or a Jumbotron that we kind of styled up with our own images. Again, this is all included in the code that we'll deliver on our Git. But real quickly, let's see how we're integrating with the Marvel API. So I'm going to type in a search term, and you can see right now we've got a really neat type ahead put in together with Bootstrap type ahead. And we'll show you how that works in a second. But if I hit Spider-Man and hit search, this will bring back a page that has a picture of Spider-Man, it's got a name, and then it's got a description, you know, with great power comes great responsibility. And then we've got these comics here that flip over, kind of neat. And all this is done in CSS. And we've got the comic front ends. And so if you search for a different term like Thor, you can see we go back out to the Marvel API. And this time we bring back a picture of Thor. And we give his description and his title. And we've got different comics. And you can see here sometimes some of the comics actually have a description about what's in the issue. And so this is what we're going to build, and we think it's pretty cool. Okay, now that we've seen the application we built, let's take time to look at the code that we use to construct it. Now, if you're new to coding, some of these concepts may be foreign to you, but I want to give you hope. We're going to release a very in-depth course that covers everything from soup to nuts on how we built it. If you're a dev out there today, a working dev, pay attention to the API part and how we're using MVC and models and everything to cover that as well. So I think there's enough for everyone here to look and see. So let's check out the code right now. This is Visual Studio 2017, and we built this utilizing ASP.NET MVC Core 2. So if you're familiar with MVC, then you'll know this will look very familiar. If not, I'm going to go through real quickly what MVC is. Now, MVC is Model View Controller, and that just simply means that a controller listens for requests from the browser and then passes that information. And then once you get into collecting data, those kind of things, you fill up your data inside your models, and then your view is your display engine or what we commonly refer as the web page. So how that works out in real life is you see right here that this URL here is not necessarily a link to a web page. This is a link to a controller, and then this is a link, or not a link, but a definition of an action. So like we have a controller and then the action we run, and this action will actually return a page that you're looking at right here. And that's called what we call a view. But let's look at the code real quick, how this is put together. So this is 2017, and this is a standard MVC project from Core 2. And you can see in here, we're going to open up our controllers, and we have one. It's called the home controller. And as I showed you in that URL up at the top, this is referenced, it's called home. And if we look at this home controller, you can see right here, this is our action called hero. And it takes a search string, and the search string is coming from the search box. And our search box is actually calling the home controller hero action and passing it this value. In the case we saw Spider-Man, Thor, or any of the other Marvel names that we could come up with. So next thing we do is we create a Marvel object called the Marvel API, and we're calling it Marvel. And so let's look at how we did that. So what we did was we created a namespace or a folder called Marvel API, and inside this we have models. Now models are the containers that contain the information that we want. And so in this case we have a character model, we have a comic model, we also have some other models that we're not using like series, story, event, enums, creators, and we also have this one called the character comic view model. We'll get into more of that in a little bit. And we also have this Marvel CS, which is kind of the main class that we're using to communicate to the Marvel API. So let's look at that. So this is what this is doing right here. This is calling our Marvel CSS. And it's in the Marvel API. So it's in the Marvel API, find the Marvel file, and let's call that one. So let's look at what we're doing here. So the first thing that you notice right away, I've got some variables established up front. The first one is I've got a base URL that all the URLs in the Marvel API begin with this. So I just kind of set that up as a constant string that doesn't change. And then if it did change going forward and Marvel released a V2, I could really easily change this in one place. The other thing you may notice is here is this is your public key and this is a private key. And you may be wondering, where did this come from? Well, if we go look at the Marvel developer portal, which is developer.marvel.com, and here is where you would get those keys. You would go in here, sign up for an account, and they would give you a key. The other thing that's real interesting about this site that you'll notice is this is where I actually came up with the models that I want to do. As you can see here, this interactive allows me to see and call the Marvel API without actually writing code. And you can see here's where I got the information on all of the fields that are in my model. So I simply copied all of these models, copied all these fields and put them into models. And models is what I will use to interchange the data from the API and to my view. So that's kind of how that works. So right here, what you'll need to do to make this work is to get your own keys. And you do that again on get key. But let's go further and look back at the code. So one thing you might notice right away if you've been coding for a while is one of the big no-nos is to put things like this in a code file. I did that so that we could talk about them more easily. Typically these would be in a config file or something like that. So hopefully you guys that are expert coders out there don't ding me too much, but just to demonstrate like what you need to get this to work, I thought it'd be easier to see, put it on one file. Now, the next part of this that's real important is I create what's called an HTTP client, and that's just something built in with .NET that allows us to send URLs over the internet and call other resources. And this is the magic, really, that does everything. Now you'll notice right here, I've created this static. That simply means that I only need one copy of this. I don't need multiples, and that this HTTP client can take multiple URLs and return responses to me. So let's look real quickly about how do we get a list of characters or return a character to us. And so I have a public async task, and async means it's going to not be called in the same thread. You have to wait for it. You can call it and go away and it'll eventually come back. You don't have to wait for it to return. And then we're calling this get characters. So if we go back to our home controller where the request is coming from the internet, when we pass it our search string, you can see right here we're calling Marvel get characters and passing it the name. In the case of Spider-Man, Thor, Captain America, Iron Man will be right here, okay? And so this is how this is getting called, and that's simply calling this function over here in our Marvel CSS. Now, there was a couple of things that we have to do for the Marvel API to work, given the standard that Marvel has put back to us. Now, the things that we had to do here is pretty common, but not every API will function this way. But we just want to show you what we had to do to call the Marvel API from a server side. So the first thing you have to do is you have to get a timestamp. Marvel requires that. And then once you have a timestamp, you take that private key and the public key and you mash them together. And this is what the string format's doing. And then you do something where we're called to create a hash of these three values, which means we put them together and we made a cryptographic value out of the hash. Now down here, I have the create hash function that I wrote, and I'm not going to go in detail on how all this works. You definitely can read about this, but if you're just downloading our code, it'll be included in our Git repo. And essentially what it's returning is this hash string right here. It goes through all this work to do that. And so now that I have a hash, I can, where I'm making it right here, where I can say create hash, pass it the string of them mashed together, and then I can take this hash and create the request URL. So remember, I take the base URL and then I add the specific part of the API that I'm looking for, in this case, characters, and it returns a API key. I pass the API key, the timestamp, the API key, the hash, and then I've got some formats of the comics or whatever here, and I'm going to return 30 comics, and I'll show you why I did that in a second, and I pass it a character ID. So that's how I get a list of comics for a character. Now, one of the other things that's real similar if you go to get characters as well, is that I also do the same thing. I get a timestamp, I get a hash, I'm mashing them together. I'm calling the base URL, and this is called the characters URL. And again, I pass the timestamp, my API key, my hash, and the name that I want to use. In this case, this name is what was typed into the search box, and that would be Spider-Man or Iron Man or whatever. And this returns a URL in the string.format. And then I format this URL into something that's called a URI, which is required for us to call this our HTTP client with get async. That's a specific way that it formats the URL for us. And this returns a response. And now in here, in this response, what I want to do is put this response into JSON. And JSON is basically just a file format that you can interchange data between our APIs and our views or our front end. It's a common interchange format. And so what I need to do is get the results from this call and put it into JSON. And this is what this is doing. So I'm hitting response.content, and I read as a string async, and I have the JSON file, and I push that into JSON. Now what I'm using here to do this is a NewSoft JSON library that I included with that you can get with .NET. It was really easy to do, and I go out to NuGet and grab it. But what I do is then I take this JSON file and I deserialize that into an object, and this object is called character data wrapper, and that allows me to take this and put it into an object that I can turn around and eventually pass to my view. So let's look at the comic data wrapper, or the character data wrapper. And this is in the character CS right here, and let's look at it. And if you look real close, and I'm going to show you this on the website for the Marvel Developer Portal, you'll see that I have basically copied what's in here and put those in my models over here. And my public code, the status, the copyright, the attribution text, attribution HTML, and then I have what's called the character data container, and I'm calling that data, and we'll show how we access that in a second. And then inside the data container is the offset, the limit, the total, the count, and then inside it has a list of character results. And then the character is the name, and then you see the thumbnail we're using, the comics, those kind of things. So this models the data that's going to come back from the Marvel API. And that's real important when you're working with APIs, is that you have to model the data that they're going to send back to you. So let's go back to our Marvel CS here and see what happens. So now we just return this character data wrapper, and so what we have now is all the character data that we're looking for. So if we go back to your home controller, you can see that I get the character data wrapper, and then I call character model dot data dot results and give me the first one, which is going to be, we're only returning one, but just in case more than one result came back, we only want to take one and we call that our character. And you may be wondering why this works, but if you go back and look at our character model, this, if you go up here in the character, this is character data right here. And we're referencing that right here. So it's character model dot data dot results, and that gives me this character. Now, what I need to do is go back to the API, and I want to get some comics for the character. And so what I did was I called it and I passed it the character ID. I've got a list of comics, and now in my comic get comic, I actually returned 30 comics. And the reason I did that was because some of the comics don't have images, and I don't want to show images or show comics without images. So I made a blank list of comics with images, and I'm gonna hold 3 because if you look at our UI, remember it only had 3 of those spinny cards on the front. And so I only wanna get 3. And so I get 30 comics back. Let me show you real quickly how that was done. And if I go down here, get comics for character, I pass it the character ID. And then in my URL here, I'm passing a limit of 30 right here. And the reason I did 30 is because if you search for Captain America, there was 20 to 25 of them that were just kind of irrelevant. And so they didn't have images. So I wanted to get past that. So I'm gonna get a collection of 30. And I'm gonna loop over the comics that are coming back, and I'm gonna check for 2 things. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look at the description if it has one, and if it's too long, I wanna truncate it because I noticed that sometimes the descriptions would come back and they're too long. So I'm just gonna truncate this. And I'll show you real quickly how that looks on the front end. So if I go back to my hero search and I look at Thor here, you can see here that this one was really long and I've got my dot, dot, dot at the bottom. And I had truncated this one, and you can see this one wasn't truncated because it's a little bit shorter. So that's how that kind of shows on the front end. The next thing I do is I look for the image name. And what the API returns is the image path, or and then also an extension. But that path will say image not available if it's going to return an image that's not a comic front or a comic page. And so what I do is, like, if I do not see these words in the path, I'm going to add it to my comics with images. And then I'm going to increment my count. And when I loop back around, if my count is equal to 3, I'm going to break out of here. Otherwise, it's going to keep doing this until it finds 3 comics that actually have an image. Now, once it does that, it'll hit this break statement and come out, and it's going to take the character view model. And let's look at that real quick. So the character view model is a character. It also has a list of comics and an attribution text. So I'm going to put my character in here, and I'm going to put the list of comics, the 3 comics I just found in here. And that's pretty much what I'm going to do. And this is what this line of code is right here doing. It's saying ccvm.character. And I'm going to add the character I found, and then the comics with images I just found, I'm going to pull that back. And then I'm going to return this model to my view. And that's the round trip for this. So this is a controller action through this code is putting data into a model right here and then passing that model to a view, which is the essence of MVC. So let's look at the view real quick to see how this kind of works. So I'm going to go over here into my views, and I'm going to pick my hero HTML page. Now the hero has to have the same name in most cases as the action, and that's how MVC knows which page to look at. So let's look at this real quick. So you can see up at the top of the page here, I declared a model from the character comic view model of the type that's being passed from a return statement. It's really important that this must match what's going on being passed back from the controller. And those things have to match. And so Then in here, we can see now where we start laying out our HTML with Bootstrap. We're using Bootstrap here. That's kind of the default thing that comes with MVC templates. And these are the classes that do the styling. We'll look at a couple of styling, but like going in detail into Bootstrap and the styling is kind of out of scope for this little tutorial code walkthrough. But you can see right here, I've got my image class, and I can access the value of the thumbnail in this model, model.character.thumbnail.path, and also model.character.thumbnail.extension, which will be, in the case of the Marvel API, like JPEG or PNG or something like that. And I pass that to a source tag in an image tag. And that allows me to display, you know, the hero's image, like Spider-Man, Iron Man, Thor, whatever. And then in here, I have my title to the side, which is my comic title. And again, I'm hitting my model.character.name, my model.character.description. And then I also have a URL that's passed back if I want to have that. And then this allows me to have the Learn More button, which will take you to the Marvel website. And then I am passing back my attribution text. All of this came from this model that was passed into the view. Then I have a call to action where it says, hey, go to Coder Foundry, learn some more stuff. And then over here, the magic of getting the comics is done with a simple loop where I loop over the model.comics, which is the list of comics in our model, and I call it a comic, and I just loop over this 3 times. Boom, boom, boom. And it's creating an image class, which has the thumbnail and the thumb extension. Now, the one thing about the API that's unique is you can specify a size of the image you want to use, and that is portrait_uncanny, which is a size that's put together from the Marvel API that's specific to them. And this is the size that I wanted to use. You can look at the API to figure out exactly what size of image you want to use and what this represents. And then in here, I have a card body, and I've got a class called back. And up here, I got a class called flipper and a class called front. And if you look at the CSS, that's what allows this to flip from front to back. And then I have a more info button at the bottom. And that's essentially what we're doing. So let's also look at our layout page as well. And our layout page gives us the common look of every page. It gives us the heading, the search box, and those kind of things, so that we can have an index, which is our home page, and the hero page for our search page. But this layout controls the look of both. And I just wanted to bring attention to a couple things I did in CSS. So as you'll see right here, this has one CSS file, and it also has something I got from Typekit, Adobe Typekit, where that I can download a font that I'm using, and that's that comic-y looking font on the front. And all of this is laid out in my CSS. So let me show you kind of what I'm talking about there. So if I go back to the home page here, you can see that as I go through the page, this doesn't change. This is in that layout. And then if I go to Spider-Man, you can see that my layout doesn't change. It basically just fills in the middle, and that's done with the render body statement. But all of this stays the same, and this is being changed depending on what page we're on. And so I'm going to show you how I put this together real briefly, and we'll look at that real quick. So again, what I did is I created a div up here, and at the top of it, I had a container.fluid. That means that it's going to stretch it to the side. It's a Bootstrap class. And then I have a class called Skyline, which is what I made. And I put all of my CSS work in the heroic-features.css. So let's look at that. We can find that right here in our www CSS folder. And I'm going to find the Skyline class, scroll down through here, and I'm just going to show it to you. Now, what I did was in the Skyline is I created a background image and the URL of skylinefinal.png. Now, one thing that people may not know that in the background image thing is you can actually have more than one background. And so, and how this works is the background that's in the first position is on top, and the other one would be behind that image. And so I created a Skyline Final PNG, and that's just something I put together in Photoshop. And that's these buildings right here. And I just put something in Photoshop that actually repeats real nicely. And then that other one, that linear gradient that I was just showing you, that is this background, this orange to blue background. And that's this linear gradient to bottom, and I've got some colors in here to do that. What's really cool about this right here is that you can look on the internet and find a lot of people who's done a lot of work to make some really unique gradients. And you can go there, specifically sky gradients or gradients for any type. And then in here I have the background repeat X, which allows this as the browser gets bigger or smaller, it repeat the background, and that's how this image of the buildings keeps repeating. And so if we look at it, this is the end result. So we've got this really cool font that we got from Typekit that shows here. I put some styling on top of that with my styling there. I've got a great little gradient background with some buildings. I hard-coded some images of some Captain Marvel comics and put these in a Jumbotron, and now I can search. And again, as we reiterate, this will go to the home controller called the Hero Action and return Iron Man for us to see. And we think that's pretty cool, pretty neat. Now, so what's next? Well, if you're following along and you're like, I don't know a lot what's going on here, this is a lot of a really quick overview of how we did. I wanted to let you know that at Coder Foundry, we will release an in-depth course for this so that you can see and learn exactly how we did it, and all the code that I just showed you will be laid out for you in detail, including the Bootstrap, the CSS, the HTML, the JavaScript was used, how we did the type ahead, how we're communicating to the API in more detail if you're on your learning to code journey. If you are coding for a living, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, and I hope this will give you a good overview of what we're doing. If not, head to our Git repo and just download the code, and you can peruse it on your own time, and hopefully this will let you consume other APIs out there as well. It's like Marvel, and then DCE has an API. There's a lot of TV stuff. There's New York Times. There's a lot of APIs out there you can consume. And so this technique can be used on more things just than Marvel. Well, thanks a lot for your time, and I hope you have a great day. And don't forget to see Captain Marvel this Friday.